You all set? Hey, good evening. This is the Goffstown School District Deliberative Session for 2022. I'm Jim Raymond, the School District Moderator. I apologize for being late, but Turtle Hill Road was blocked at the lower end, so it's a long way around the back way, but thank you all for coming. And frankly, had the weather report said snow instead of rain, we might have postponed this, but it didn't, so here we are, and I'm happy to see all of you. There was I don't know if any of you listened to the economics podcast from Freakonomics. They talked last week about how change can increase efficiency, a chance for us to look at our processes. Well, we've changed. We're over here instead of over at the high school. We're coming out of the COVID era, sort of, so maybe we can look at ourselves and find ways to make this more efficient, but I suspect it will at least be quicker tonight. One of the changes from prior years is we don't have the music department to open the event for us. If you recall last year, I did ask Scott Gross to sing for us. He declined, and I assume we'd get the same answer tonight, so I will not ask him again, but if you will rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. There's the flag over there. We'll call that one the official flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. As we do before town events, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce the people who have contributed to this event. I might have everybody in the audience identify themselves because it is a small group, but I won't do that until afterwards. We'll make it optional. I do want to first introduce the school board members. If you could raise your hand. Heather Trapaz. How did I do on that? Okay. This is my annual event to massacre names. I take full advantage of it. Retta Chaffee. Dan Cloutier. I don't see he's not here. Terry Fisher. Jenny McKinnon, Janelle O'Brien. Hold on, Ellen, I'm not getting it, not yet. Shane Erasmus, Jared Talbot, and now Ellen Tomakowicz. Thank you. Okay, for the budget committee, if you're here, and I didn't take a nose count, Joe Alexander, Fred Platt, Bill Cordes, I don't see, Greg Flegel, Shula Mark Sund, Melanie Renfrew Hebert, Stacy Bellamore, Dennis Lynch, Lauren Dukas, Spencer Diaz, Richard Manzo, and Evelyn Redmond. I commend you on your strong showing for the budget committee. Mark LeMay is the representative from the select board, Jared from the school board, and Richard Fletcher from the village water precinct. I don't see him tonight, so thank you. For those of you who are not familiar with the budget process in town, and it's a combination of the budget committee and the governing board, school board or the select board, work to come up with a budget, or not come up, to disagree, but it's a collaborative process, and I commend both boards on their work. I'd like to introduce the school staff who's here, and I'd like you to just stand or raise your hand. Superintendents, Brian Balke. Scott Gross, the business administrator, the non-singer in the group. Kate McGrath, the human resources director. Way over there. Dr. Jennifer Doloff, special education. Stephen Bourget, the technology director. He appeared before the CIP committee and was grilled by us, and he comes back from where. Randy Loring, the facilities director. And Don Tabor, facilities supervisor. Are the principals here, Brian? Okay. Okay, Frank McBride, out of his element, but over here, dressed sportily. And Wendy Kohler, the Mountain View principal. Anybody else, Brian? Suzanne Pishker from the Maple Ave over there. Kathleen Doyle. Why don't I just go down the names? Kim McCann is the assistant principal at the high school. Brandy Williams, the assistant principal here. Lisa Johnson's the assistant principal at Mountain View, along with Suzanne as principal. Jerry St. Gelais, the Bartlett principal. Christine Coburn, the Bartlett assistant principal. Kathy Stoyles, the Glen Lake principal, she is. And Christine Coburn is the assistant principal. I try to recognize any of the state representatives who are here. Joe Alexander is here. Fred Platt. Are there any others who I've missed? Fred, I don't see any. And I also, for Select Board, Mark LeMay is here for the Select Board. I think that's the only one. So, thank you. The school, we used to call it the school meeting, then under SB2, it's now the deliberative session of our bifurcated process, but I will still refer to it as the school meeting from time to time. It's a chance for us to recognize people who have contributed to the school, and that's done at this meeting by the giving out awards. Rather, you're going to give out the Cornerstone and Dreamkeepers Award.
Thank you. It's our honor each year to recognize individuals or groups that contribute to the schools in our community. And this process is done through nominations from staff and colleagues and the community, and it's opened each year. So this year we have 2 awards as usual, the Dreamkeeper and the Cornerstone, and we're going to present the Dreamkeeper first.
Speak into the mic, or maybe hold it up. Full screen.
Yeah, here the brother is going to get so you should play.
Hello and welcome. I'm Brian Balke, the very proud superintendent of schools, serving the communities of Goffstown and New Boston. On behalf of the Goffstown School Board, it is my honor and privilege to present this year's award winners for the Dreamkeeper Award. Every year, the school board gives out this award in recognition of people or organizations that have truly gone the extra mile of providing an exceptional education here in Goffstown. And this year, our recipients truly did go the extra mile. On behalf of the school board, I'd like to extend my appreciation and congratulations to all of our wonderful school bus drivers from Goffstown Truck Center as well as Durham School Services. Thank you so very much. We're so grateful for everything you've done, and thank you. You're well deserving of this award, and congratulations.
Our SAU 19 school bus drivers are so deserving of this year's Dreamkeeper Award. School bus drivers are such an important part of our community as they transport our most precious passengers, our children. This year has been an incredible challenge for school transportation, and I'd like to thank all of our school bus drivers who have done so much for our kids. You are truly making a difference each and every day. So congratulations on this well-deserved award.
And usually we have the recipients come up to get a certificate, but all of our bus drivers are at home sleeping, getting ready for the next bus run, scrape off the windshields. So our next award is the Cornerstone Award.
Whenever you're ready. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, sorry.
Hello and welcome. I'm Brian Balke, the very proud superintendent of schools, serving the communities of Goffstown and New Boston. On behalf of the Goffstown School Board, I'm very proud to present this year's award winners for the Cornerstone Award. Every year, the school board gives out this award in recognition of a staff or community member working within our schools who has demonstrated outstanding support of student learning. And this year, we have an incredible group being recognized. It's my pleasure and honor to recognize Dawn Tabor, our facilities supervisor, and her wonderful team of custodians and maintenance staff. We simply couldn't have done it without them. They are so incredibly dedicated and so very deserving of this award. Thank you and congratulations to Dawn and her incredible team. We're so proud of you and so grateful. Thank you.
The Goffstown School District custodial staff are so deserving of this Cornerstone Award. Our custodial staff's efforts to clean, disinfect our schools on a daily and nightly schedule has allowed our district to open and to stay open because of their dedicated service to our faculty, staff, and our students. Again, congratulations.
And we do have Dawn Tabor here, if you'd like to come up. So we will, in addition to the honor this evening, we also have their name engraved on a plaque that's in the SAU building, and we will be posting these videos on our website as well as in social media to share with others. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we begin, two people I want to acknowledge. One is Joanne Duffy, the clerk of the school. A lot of our rules are really created for her benefit so she can create the minutes, the record of the meeting. So you blame me for the rules, but they're really to make her job easier. Second, I want to thank Denise Moran, the executive. She has a new title. What is it? What's her title now that changed? Executive. What? Well, yeah, the guru, the Grand Poobah. She's the one who, executive, yeah, it's been changed though. She's the one who fields all my many questions and gives me the information, and most of the information I have in this notebook is from Denise, so thank you very much for your assistance. Okay, most of you have heard this lecture many times, but I want to give it again in abbreviated form for the benefit of new voters in Goffstown of what we're doing here tonight. Goffstown, in its infinite wisdom, adopted the Official Ballot Act, RSA 40:13, known as SB 2 when it was enacted by the legislature, that bifurcated the old school meeting and on the town side, the town meeting, from one night when we both discussed, debated, amended, and voted on to two separate sessions. All the voting now occurs on the old traditional town meeting day, the second Tuesday in March, by ballot. Everything is done on a written ballot, leaving this meeting to do the first of those activities: discuss, present, debate, and amend if you wish. but we don't take any final action on any of the articles. So what happens is, if there's no amendment, no discussion after everybody's had a chance to talk, we just move on. We don't take a final vote. Instead, the article as it appears on the warrant or as amended by this meeting appears on the warrant to be voted on by ballot at the second Tuesday in March, the voting day. And on that day, the polls are open the normal hours at the high school and at Bartlett School from 7 to 7. It's a long day for those of us who are there. And then the votes are counted. So it's a separate process. Everybody clear then on what we're doing here? I do want to recognize that Barbara Griffin, who's a member of the House, did come in after I introduced the others. She snuck in the door. Okay, rules of the meeting. We follow Raymond's rules of good order and civility. On those, you speak only when recognized by the moderator. This is, I hate to say it, it sounds self-congratulatory. It's the moderator's meeting. You will speak into the microphones, even if you're Brad Parkhurst and you have iron lungs. We need you to speak into the microphone because that's how it gets recorded so that Joanne can do the minutes. Introduce yourself each time you speak unless you've spoken in the last couple of minutes. Don't assume I can remember your names, and the minutes certainly won't. And that applies to everybody, school board, people in the audience. Your comments are addressed to the moderator, not to, for example, individual board members. You may ask questions, but again, they're directed to the moderator. Nobody is compelled to answer. If you have questions, I will give you an opportunity to ask them all at once, and then the board or whomever will have an opportunity to answer them later if they wish. It's a much more efficient process. I will put a limit on the length of your presentation if I have to, but typically 3 minutes is a guide. Rule in Goffstown, no personal criticisms. I will rule you out of order. We all assume everybody is pulling us in the same direction towards the betterment of the school and the town, even though we may have different views on how that should be done. A few of the statutory rules, I won't go through the long list. If you want to hear them, go to the town deliberative session. Rodney reads them in great detail. I'm not going to. An amendment, if you wish to make it, you make orally and then come forward and get the forms that I have and submit it in writing, so we have it in both ways. Any motion to amend must be made and seconded. Secret ballot, which I won't invite, but it's a statutory right, is requested by 5 voters present at the meeting. Again, we have a form for that. On what I call procedural motions, you don't need to submit them in writing. They will include a motion to restrict reconsideration, and at the end of the meeting, when Brad Parkhurst makes his motion to adjourn, I won't require that to be in writing because he does that every time. Let me explain the motion to restrict reconsideration. You've heard this before. In the good old days, you'd act on something early in the meeting. Most people would go home, vote on the new dump truck. A few people would stay, and then when most of the people thinking it was over had left, move for reconsideration to re-vote, and then either defeat the dump truck or approve the dump truck. To prevent that from happening, after we've closed the discussion on an article, somebody can move to restrict reconsideration with a second, or get a vote from you. That means it cannot be brought forward again. Under the old system, you could do another meeting in 7 days, but under the SB2 towns like us, it cannot be done. So this is the final action. So we can't bring something back once we've passed over it. Anybody have any questions on what we're going to do? Now, the way an article is presented, it's on motion to bring it to the group. So usually the school board will make that motion And second, that's just to bring it forward for discussion. I will let the school board make a presentation. I will let people ask questions when you've all had a reasonable time, not an infinite time, to ask questions. We'll close the discussion, and if there's no amendment, we'll move on to the next article. Everybody good? For people who are new, this can be very confusing. I don't want you to be confused, even though it will be that way for a while. Okay, everybody ready? Okay, we're going to take the articles in order. The first article, though, is choosing the 3 members of the school board. On the town side, it's similar to the election of officers. That has to go on the written ballot. That cannot be amended, so we will not discuss that tonight. We instead will go to Article 2. This is the operating budget. Now, the operating budget article is a statutory form. It's prescribed in the statute, which means the text of it cannot be amended. The only provision in the operating budget that can be amended is the amount. If you don't like the wording, blame the legislature. Don't blame the school board or me. I am not going to read these in full detail. I will summarize them for the benefit of people watching, unless somebody asks me to. But this operating budget shall the Goffstown School District, note that they're phrased as a question. That's just the way these are done. Raise and appropriate as an operating budget, not including appropriations by special warrant articles or other appropriations, the amount blah, 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 for the purposes set forth therein, the amount of $48,854,882. Should this article be defeated, the default budget will be $48,548,234, which is the same amount as last year with certain adjustments required by law. And then there's a provision that's in the statute that if this is defeated, the school board can have a special meeting. Scott Gross at intermission will explain in great detail the calculation of the default budget. I'm not going to do that now. Okay, Jared, do you have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I'll make a motion to submit the operating budget as written.
Alan, where'd you go? Alan, do you have a second? Okay, and it's going to be presented by Scott, Gross, Jared, and Callum. When they're done their presentation, I'll then come back forward and see if anybody has any questions.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm glad to be at Mountain View. Hopefully, it's good that we're changing schools. Maybe we'll do it in Bartlett next year. We'll figure it out. But what we're going to do is present Article 2, which is our operating budget. So as you see from the numbers, we're at our proposed budget is $48,854,882. This was recommended by the school board 9-0, and it was recommended by the budget committee 11-1-0. So what makes up our budget that goes on the warrant article? What you'll see up here are different things. We have the general fund. So this is really the meat and potatoes of the school board budget, or the budget, as you would say, for all of our activities that occur within the school system. You also had a self-sustaining food service budget that we have listed. This is something that we have to add to the overall warrant article, but this is a really standalone fund so that students can buy their lunches. We have expenses for lunches, and that's what we have as our number there. We have a special revenue fund, and those totals make the number that comes on the warrant article. So what you see in the columns is our FY 21-22. Now, the school is a little bit different from the town. Our fiscal calendar does not run from January to December. It runs from July to June. So that's why you see the 21-22 there. So we're currently in the 21-22 fiscal year, and you'll see what our budget comparison, what our budget was approved for this year. Next to it, you see the default budget. This is the statutory requirements we have to say that if our proposed budget fails, we shall operate based on our our default budget, which is our current budget with some adjustments that are contractually obligated. And then we have our proposed budget, which is being put forward to the voters for total consideration within the school system. So the general fund, as I said, was really the meat and potatoes of this fund. And as you can see, we have a $115,748 increase year over year. So not that large as it relates to our current year going up to what our next budget is for our Fund 10. What accounts for our budget increases? This is very important. So people want to know why our budgets are increasing. We want to try to articulate and really put those bullet points out there. So we are adding one net new position in our entire school system. This one position is for a teacher interventionist, specifically at Bartlett. We have 0 there. And we found that really, in order to have equity across Maple and Bartlett, Maple has 3, we really should have 1 in Bartlett. And this was not a situation where we could just cannibalize one from Maple and have them work part-time at Bartlett. We want to make sure our students really have that interventionist that they need to be successful in their school development. We had a special education increase for out-of-district placements. These are individuals that have to go to other schools outside of Goffstown. There was a 5% increase that was approved by the New Hampshire Department of Education. The last one on this slide is really the voter-approved salaries for our support staff. So we're going to be looking at later at contracts for our teachers, but we also have contracts and union contracts associated with some of our support staff. The increase is also year over year, and that constitutes that number that you see as an increase. Health insurance costs, this is mandated by the state. You'll also see this at the town level, have increased to 6.2%. Again, we are told what we need to put into our budget, and that was our increase of 6.2%. That accounts for that $115,000. Propane costs have increased. I know that a lot of us are looking at our energy bills, and propane has gone up, and as you can see, we've gone from $1.16 per gallon to $1.58 per gallon for our budget estimates. And then transportation costs, I know that many of us have been very supportive of our of our bus systems. We all understand that there are some issues that we're trying to work out, and we appreciate our busing staff that we have. The transportation costs have increased 3% within our budget based on that contractual obligation we have with our busing system here in Goffstown.
Your next slide has to deal with your revenues, and your revenues are on this salmon-colored piece of paper here. And we derive our revenues in Goffstown from local sources, which are mostly your tuition from New Boston. We also get some modest state revenues, mostly in the area of food service. Our federal grants, that went up to about $2.5 million. Use of fund balance is the next one on there, and this is a combination of unspent monies from the current year's budget plus any unanticipated revenues, and I'm projecting that at about $2.5 million. The next two are a little confusing, but I'm going to try to explain them. You're going to see that we get New Hampshire adequacy, and this is a formula that is based upon the number of pupils in our district, and then there are add-ons for students who might be eligible for free and reduced lunch, kids who might be reading below grade level, etc. You're going to see that that's a pretty decent increase, about $600,000 increase. But when you go below that, the next one is called your statewide property tax, you'll see that that decreased. And here's the reason why. So this past legislative session, the legislature is giving a one-time tax break to all New Hampshire taxpayers for SWEPT. It was $100 million, one time. And what they did is they held school districts harmless, so they raised the adequacy to make up for any monies that you might have lost in SWEPT revenue. So even though those two numbers don't tie out, they don't tie out not because the legislature didn't make Goffstown whole. They don't tie out because we had fewer students, all right? So you're going to see in your tax bill next year, you're going to see a decrease in your what's called your statewide property tax. I think it's around 80 some odd cents. and then in the following year that will go back up. But I just wanted to at least acknowledge that, and hopefully Barbara and Joe, I did that correctly, I'm hoping, and Fred. All right. And then you'll see that your total revenue is slightly less than the prior year. The revenues are the toughest part of my job because they do fluctuate based upon federal government, state government, and also unanticipated revenues that we might get, as well as an underspend of the budget. So the last couple of years when we did underspend due to COVID-19, that boosted up your fund balance, and that's why the revenues are somewhat difficult to project. And these are estimates. On your next slide is the default budget. Now this budget is one that is prepared by the school district by statute, and I'm not going to go over all of it, but essentially it is RSA 40:4. And really on this slide you'll see that the default budget is about $306,000 less than the proposed budget. And on the default budget by statute also, it is the green handout. And on the back of that green handout, I'm not going to go over every one, but we do take out one-time expenditure. So you'll notice that we took out the bond, the principal and interest on the Goffstown High School bond because it was paid off. And then if there are any one-time expenses, those come off the default budget. And then if there are any contractual obligations, such as, say, a support staff contract, they are part of the default. But if you do have any questions about the default budget, please reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to go over that with you. The next slide, Jared is going to talk about enrollment, and I wanted to just note that there is a correction on the FY21. It should read 2008-04, and I just wanted you to know that. I copied and pasted it by accident, so I'll take the heat for that one.
Thank you, Mr. Gross. So what goes into our budget and why do we need it? We really start with our enrollment. So as you'll see from the past 5 years, we have the enrollments of all of our different schools. Now I want to take the time and notate. We have listed here October 1st, 2019 and October 1st, 2020, and you'll see in Glen Lake. That was the amount of students we had enrolled within Glen Lake. However, during these COVID times, we were not able to have what we call role models for our pre-K. Now, role models are very important because these are additional students that we use to really socialize with those people, with those students that have individual education plans. So these are students that come in that are 3 or 4 years old, and those would be included in our enrollment numbers for Glen Lake. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we did not allow any role models in those years. So we do try to put in what we actually had versus what we would have had if we had those role model students enrolled within the Glen Lake school system. We also have Maple, Bartlett, Mountain, and the high school, and you can see the totals that we have listed year over year. So we've, in general, remained somewhat steady, that we have increased, we have dipped, but as a whole, we have remained steady with our total student enrollments within Goffstown. What you'll see is a cost per pupil, and this is really one of the things that I think the administration, both at the SAU and the school districts and our teachers, do very well. What you'll see here is the state elementary level that we have for cost per student. So per pupil, these are the monies associated with educating each student within our school system. You'll see the state level, you'll see how Goffstown's doing, and you'll see the difference. And what you're seeing here is consistently, we are under the state average for a cost per pupil here in Goffstown, even though that we have a terrific education system.
If I could, I just wanted to make one note, because this was on a call about 2 weeks ago. When you see that $19,331 state per pupil cost, that's an anomaly based upon COVID-19. So a lot of school districts at the elementary school level added monies to their budget or did projects at elementary schools that drove that number up. So I would suspect that in a non-COVID year, it would not have gone up over $2,000. So I just want to make that does stick out like a sore thumb in terms of that. But generally speaking, you know, Goffstown is about $2,800 less than the state average for cost per pupil for elementary. It's middle.
Thank you, Mr. Gross. What you'll see now is the middle school. Again, what you're seeing is the state average for middle school students, cost per pupils, the amount of money that it goes into teaching each individual student that we have at the middle school. You see Goffstown, and again, you see the difference that we're hovering roughly around $2,000 or more than $2,000 less than what the state average is. So again, we're continuing to provide a terrific education at a great cost to our taxpayers. The next is our high school, and again, you can see the difference between the state average and the cost per pupil at our high school level. So on average, and let's stick with 2021, the state, it was $17,758 to teach a high school student. For Goffstown, the cost was $15,371, and that's where the difference is. So again, we're considerably under average, the state average, for our cost per pupil for teaching our children.
On the next slide, you'll see achievement data, and this is a screenshot, essentially, of the school district website. And really what this is trying to show or to demonstrate is to try to tell the story that Goffstown has historically been well below the state average cost per pupil, and then in terms of that return on investment, the results that we're getting, whether it be our standardized test scores or our student success, we are doing very well. That's not to say that there aren't areas where we need improvement. And what you'll see here is if you go to this website, you will see all of our state testing, all the way from first grade all the way to 12th grade. For the high school, the assessment is the SAT. And from pretty much K through 12, there are certain state standardized test scores. The school board just had a presentation, I think it was at the last meeting, so if you wanted to see a report out on that, you can watch that other meeting. I will say though that COVID has created some issues, there's no doubt about it, most notably in the area of mathematics, which is being addressed at all of our schools in terms of interventions. But what you'll see here in terms of our achievement data is that we're scoring above the state average in terms of our test scores, and our cost per pupil is below the state average. So that's really the story that we want to try to convey. And here are, again, hopefully most of you took a copy of this PowerPoint. I'm not going to read all of them off, but just a few of them that were noteworthy. National Merit Scholars. We had a presidential scholar for the first time in Goffstown High School history. This means that we had a student who was in the top 50 of all high school students in the country. That student went on to Harvard University this fall. You'll also see a lot of success stories in terms of our clubs and our athletic programs, both at the high school and the middle school. So I wanted to at least, acknowledge that it's not just about academics. We do have also a wide variety of programs and initiatives, clubs and athletics that are co-curriculars that our students participate in. So this is the one that always makes me nervous, and some of it probably makes you nervous too. We talk about the tax rate. And so Jared jokingly says, Scott, you're really not good at predicting the tax rate. You're probably right, Jared. But I wanted to show you here it is the most challenging part of what I do, and it's simply because of the revenue side. So I wanted to try to give you a little bit of a history. So in 2009, the tax rate was $13.28 per thousand, and I was projecting, when I say a range, I know some people don't like a range, but for me, I used to work in the private sector. We often did give a range, and I gave a range of $13.89 to $14, and it came in at $13.47, well below what I projected, and that was because of COVID. We had an underspend of the budget. We saw some additional grant revenue. Same thing happened in 2020, where the tax rate was $13.47 at that time, and I had projected to be around the $14.25 to $14.45 range, and it came in way, way lower, $13.33. There were several big reasons for that, which were not really predicted One was what we're kind of going through right now in terms of our transportation. We ran at least 5 less buses. That was a credit of over $250,000 that the district received because we didn't run all those buses. And by the way, we're getting that same credit this year. We also received a credit from our health insurance provider, which was also substantial. Again, that was because folks did not seek medical care and or dental care during COVID-19. You probably heard this from others in the media. It was published that people were just getting less elective surgeries. So once again, came in far less. And then we look at the projection now. So now we're at $13.33. So again, I was predicting that this would be about $14 and change. And now I am projecting the same thing, about $14 to $14.10. These are estimates, and they are subject to change. So if we get more in terms of tuition revenue from New Boston, or if we're getting more federal grants and we have an underspend of our budget, those numbers will likely go downward, but I try to give you worst case scenarios. And lastly, I wanted to let you know that there is a lot of this information that we're talking about tonight, as well as the actual budget itself, is all online. You can go to the district's website at goffstown.k12.newhampshire.us, nh.us, and you'll be able to see all of the budget files there. So with that, I believe Jared and I are done with the budget presentation. Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Joanne said the people sitting behind me, behind the podium, can't hear any of this. Can all of you hear the speaking? Okay, I'm going to turn this slightly, not to be rude to you, but in hopes my voice will carry over here too, because they're hearing gobbledygook while you're hearing something clear. And if it starts to fade out over there, let me know. And let me know if this helps at all, because I caught about 10% of that presentation. Okay, you just heard a very detailed explanation of the operating budget. Are there any questions from anybody? Seeing none, we will close the discussion on Article 2 and then move to Article 3. Okay, there's been a motion made by Jared to restrict reconsideration. Remember, I told you what this is for. Is there a second? Greta seconds it. Okay, motion's been made to restrict reconsideration. What this means, if it passes, we will not go back to Article 2 during the meeting or at all because of the SB 2 rules. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. I declare it a vote. Thank you. Okay, now we'll look at Article 3, the Teacher Collective Bargaining Agreement. I will note a collective bargaining agreement is governed by statute. So when we talk about it, it cannot be, well, it can be amended, but any amendment can put it back into further bargaining. The voters in their own don't have the ability to change the amount and make it binding on the unit that you're bargaining with, in this case, the teachers. Jared, do you have a motion?
I'll make a motion to Article 3 as written.
Heather, do you have a second? Okay, it's been moved and seconded, and Kate McGrath is going to speak to it. Okay, Kate McGrath will speak to this article.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Kate McGrath. I'm the Human Resources Director for the districts. So we're going to take you through the collective bargaining agreement that we successfully negotiated with the Goffstown Education Association for the upcoming warrant. The school board has recommended this agreement 8-0, and the budget committee has recommended it 11-01. We just want to take a minute to talk about the importance of a teacher contract. So we have 265.6 full-time equivalents that are covered by this agreement. The individuals that are covered by the Goffstown Education Association ranges from our elementary educators, our special educators, our middle school teachers, and high school teachers. Our high school teachers are of specific content areas, so you think of your math, science, social studies. It also covers some of our specialists, like our speech pathologists, our school nurses, and our specialized area of special education teachers, as well as school psychologists. So it's a pretty broad range of individuals that are covered by this agreement. The importance of this agreement is really twofold. It is so that we have the ability to attract qualified educators. New Hampshire is a very competitive state. Recent information from our university systems indicates that we produce about 600 educators per year out of the college systems, and we're competing with all of the school states as well as the states that folks graduating from New Hampshire leave and move on to. What's even more important is the number of students that are graduating post-secondary in the critical shortage areas. So when we think about our science teachers in particular, our math teachers, we're only seeing single-digit numbers of graduates coming out of those programs on an annual basis. And that makes it very challenging when we're looking across all of the other school districts that are competing for these same educators. So the recruiting component is critically important. In addition to recruiting, we want to make sure that we're retaining the qualified educators that we're investing in. We have an incredible staff, and they work hard day in and day out to provide a high-quality education for our students. In this contract, you'll see that we've invested additional funds in training and professional development. We've recently worked with Southern New Hampshire University over the last couple of years. We're in our second cohort of doing an on-site master's degree program through SNHU so that our educators can continue to develop their own skills and their profession, but at a significantly reduced cost by an on-site program. Retention is also, this contract is important for staff morale. The reward for the high achievement, Mr. Gross just went over some of the achievements that our students have, both at the high school and middle school levels. And it's also about stability for our families and our students. So just going over the major contract changes, we did some general cleanup addressing things like job titles and other edits with job postings. The meat of the contract starts in our Article 8, which goes over individual contracts and the school year. We added language that allows the board to establish contracts for individuals covered by an agreement that's in excess of 186 days. So right now, our school year is 180 school days, and then our teachers have additional professional development days that are covered in their contract. We have found more and more that we are needing specific individuals to work beyond the 186 days to prepare for the school year. This contract will allow us to have individual contracts for specialized positions in excess of the 186 days to meet student needs. We've also added language requiring staff who resign without permission from the superintendent after July 1st to pay a replacement fee. So you can imagine, we issue our teacher contracts in April, and teachers have until July 1st to resign if they find another position or have to leave for another reason. But for staff who are going to other New Hampshire schools or leaving for a similar position, they need to notify the superintendent and seek permission to do that after July 1st. The window closes on us in terms of our ability to attract high-quality staff after that July 1st date passes. Article 11, working conditions. We added planning time for Bartlett and Maple teachers to the contract. Because we need additional time to plan, this will take place in the second year of the contract, and it will afford the Bartlett and Maple teachers a fourth unencumbered planning period each week. We've also added coverage pay for staff who give up a planning period to cover for an absent colleague when a sub cannot be secured. So many of you may have heard through communications, whether it's newsletters, if you have students in the district, there continues to be a significant substitute shortage. We are constantly looking for qualified individuals who want to cover for teacher absences. And with COVID in particular, when staff are ill and they are not allowed to come to work, we've seen significant shortages. So to make sure we have the most qualified individual covering for our students when a teacher is out, we are now allowing pay for those teachers who are taking on that additional coverage and giving up their planning period. Under professional compensation, we have changed the credit for industry experience from 50% to full-time. So what does that mean? If I've been an engineer for 10 years and I am looking at a math position, for example, at Goffstown High School or Mountain View Middle School, I would currently only get 5 years of credit for my 10 years of experience. This new contract would allow us to give the full credit for those 10 years of experience when coming and being placed on the salary schedule. This also allows the superintendent to issue a sign-on bonus of up to $1,000 for critical shortage areas. So again, going back to the times when we're competing with other districts, and if that $1,000 helps us sweeten the pot just a little bit more to get a candidate to come to us, this just gives us another tool in our toolbox for attracting qualified individuals. We have currently 2 pay structures that teachers can elect to receive their pay in, and because the 22nd pay has so few staff members taking advantage of it, we've eliminated that option to streamline the business process and function when we're processing payroll. Right now, our Goffstown High School teachers get paid if they have to take on an extra section of what they teach. We've added language so that Mountain View Middle School teachers can also take advantage of this opportunity if they are able to take on an additional course if we're unable to fill certain positions. And then last but not least, under professional compensation, we've added language around a new mentor program that will be developed and formalized. I mentioned earlier that we tackled some changes under professional development. So we have added tuition payback for those resigning after July 1st. So again, we talked about if an individual gives notice after July 1st, they need prior approval from the superintendent to do so. And if they leave without that prior approval, they're subject to a 50% tuition payback. We've also added professional development money for critical shortage area endorsements with the same payback provisions that are outlined above. So what this will allow us to do is if we have educators who are willing to take on extra coursework for obtaining additional endorsements, additional areas that they would be certified to teach, we have a new extra amount of professional development money that would be allotted to that. Additional contract changes, we did some more cleanup under the insurance section. So currently we offer our staff a Section 125 benefit plan. It's a health spending account and dependent care spending account. And we just added the language into the contract to formalize that. And the cap was increased from, it's currently $1,000 and it's been increased to the IRS allowable maximum. Under leaves, we did some cleanup where the district can now accrue time in hours or days, allowing flexibility for administrative processing. And what we are asking for is a 4-year agreement. So this chart has a lot of information on it, but when we started the negotiation process, one of the things that was critically important for us to be looking at and making sure that we were focusing on is our competing towns. So I talked a little bit earlier about how many candidates are coming out of teacher prep programs on an annual basis, and we're constantly competing for those same individuals. This chart shows you right now in the first row where it says current difference, it shows you how we benchmark against our competing towns at the 50th percentile. So you can see on the bachelor's track, we're right in the ballpark. But once we start getting into the master's and above, we're hovering at 2,000 on master's, and we're over 2,000 on the additional tracks beyond the master's degree. So we really felt it was critically important to be focusing on those master degree tracks to make the most movement that we possibly could through this contract. So the bottom last row, you've got step 1 on the top and then step 18, which is the maximum pay for each of our tracks, and tracks are what level of degree they've received. You can see where we'll land. The bachelor's degree ends up being a little bit further behind, but you can see we've closed the gap pretty significantly on the master's tracks at both step 1 and step 18. So what are the wage increases that we're proposing? Again, our compensation increases focused on competitive benchmarking and trying to hit the 50th percentile. So we're not asking to be the highest paid in the state. We're not asking to be the highest paid amongst our competitors. We're asking to hit a level that is fair pay for our teachers who do an incredible job. In years 1, 2, and 3, we're asking for a step plus a grid adjustment. The grid adjustment is 2-tiered. The bachelor's track would increase by 2% in year 1, 1.5% in year 2, and 1% in year 3. I mentioned previously that the focus is on the master's tracks because that's where the benchmarking showed that we needed the most work. So the master's tracks proposed increases are 4% in years 1, 2, and 3. And if we go back to that benchmarking slide, you'll recall that still does not get us to the 50th percentile, the target that we're trying to reach. In the final year of the contract, everybody, all tracks, would get step plus a 2.5% grid adjustment. The other monetary pieces of the contract, we're asking for an additional $40,000 being put towards finalizing our co-curricular positions. So co-curricular are all of our clubs, all of our sports, and our teachers do a great job of filling and extending the classroom after school so our students have continued opportunities outside of the school day. We believe that the additional $40,000 would ensure that the staff who are performing these important roles and not receiving any money for it would be able to get a small stipend for the work that they're doing. And lastly, on the increases, we're asking for $5,000 be added to that professional development that I referred to for the critical shortage areas. So this slide shows you the costing, and this is the 4-year projection. You have with you the warrant article, which is year 1. So the first year cost, with all funds included, is $1,106,112.
Thank you, Kate. I realized after I sat down in my eagerness and haste to have Kate explain this article, I did not even summarize it for you. Does anybody want me to read Article 3 in all its numbers and detail? Seeing none, I won't bother. Does anybody have any questions on Article 3? Seeing none, I will close the discussion on Article 3. Okay, motion made by Jared to restrict reconsideration. Is there a second? By Ellen. Motion's been made and seconded to restrict reconsideration of Article 3. All those in favor, now I turn to you, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We will now move to Article 4, which is the renewal of the area agreement. This is, I'm going to read this in a summary way very briefly for those of you who have your cell phones and you want to look up the New Hampshire statute. It's RSA 195A:3, Roman numeral 11, on how these get renegotiated, or the timelines. Shall the school district vote to approve the the negotiated renewal and amendment of the authorized regional enrollment agreement, which we will now call the area agreement, between the New Boston and Goffstown school districts, which provides for the continued maintenance of area schools located in Goffstown to serve grades 7 through 12 from the school districts of Goffstown and New Boston for a term of 10 years, commencing on July 1, 2024, and terminating on June 30, 2034, in accordance with the proposed area agreement. Now, you're going to ask, where did those timelines come from? That's the statute I just referred to you that says you do this 2 years in advance, and it's for 10-year renewal, so that's why those dates are in there. Ginny, do you have a motion? Heather? Okay. Scott, you going to speak to it? Where'd Scott go? Oh, there you are.
Sorry, Jim. All right, I knew Fred Plett was going to ask me this question. Hi, Fred. How are you? Fred was going to ask me, like, what does area stand for? Because he asked me these trick questions all the time. So it's Authorized Regional Enrollment Area. Okay, Fred? Okay. And so Goffstown and New Boston have been in this educational partnership for about 50 years, and New Boston sends their students in the 7th through 12th grades to Goffstown schools. So some people ask, well, how many kids are kind of going, to the schools? About 20% of the Mountain View population are New Boston students. About 30 to 35%, give or take, are New Boston students who go to Goffstown High School. And really, it's a very good relationship between both communities. So as you saw on that previous slide where I showed you revenue of well over $7 million that we get from New Boston, well, that is the tuition revenue, and that helps lower our operating costs here in Goffstown. They also, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, they pay what's called a rental fee, and that helps address some of the capital costs as well. And for New Boston, they don't have to, although their population is growing right now, they don't have to worry about putting on another addition or building another middle school or a high school, so it helps them as well. When we talk about, why is it important for the student experience, and we talked a little bit before about all of our co-curricular type programs. Jim, I forgot to give you the plug for SpongeBob the Musical, by the way, is going to be at the high school. And there are many of our students from New Boston that participate in all of our co-curriculars, whether that be theater or sports teams. A lot of our sports teams have New Boston students, so collectively we're able to do that. The other thing that's very helpful is that collectively we can offer a lot more classes, whether that be advanced placement or other type of elective courses, because we have New Boston students. So it's a very, very good relationship between the two towns. I'm not going to go over, this is in the PowerPoint, which you should have in front of you, but the area agreement is very specific in terms of all of the different categories that are included. It deals with tuition calculations, which, wouldn't you figure, are about 4 or 5 pages alone for how to calculate a tuition, right, Melanie? It seems kind of nutty, but it's there. And then also, it discusses things like transition programs, quality of education, We have a new one this year, which is joint resources. We do have a couple of employees who do work for both school districts in our data and our IT portion. Also accountability, and then there's also some new components with respect to withdrawal and termination, which I'm going to cover in a second. And as the moderator mentioned, this is a 10-year term, and historically they have been 10-year renewal cycles. So the process, like I'm not going to go over everything here, but the boards met collectively and they reviewed the area agreement. They had many, many meetings. There were proposed changes that went back and forth between each school district. This also has to get approved by the New Hampshire Board of Education, and they did that at their December meeting, early in their first meeting in December, so they have approved this as well. And then this has to go on the ballot in both communities, and it has to pass in both communities. So I'm having this conversation with you folks tonight, and it'll appear on the ballot for folks to vote on in March. Same exact conversation is going to happen in New Boston tomorrow night, and hopefully both communities will endorse this area agreement renewal. So what are some of the changes? The first one that I mentioned, it's a 10-year term, so it's just an extension of 10 more years. You'll note that it wouldn't start until 2024. There's a reason why both boards did this, because in case there were any hiccups, you have one more year to negotiate, and that's why they did it a year in advance. In terms of quality of education, there were some very, very slight changes in the area agreement. This one had to do with accreditation. Both our middle school and our high school are accredited. I think our middle school, Wendy, are we the only one in New Hampshire, or we're one of the few, right? Seven, thank you for that, that have that type of accreditation. And then we just tried to do some housekeeping things. A lot of our resources are now on websites, so now we don't have to provide paper copies. And most of it was just clarifying what we knew was existing practice. So this is a significant change, or somewhat of a significant change. Last 10 years ago, when Dunbarton left the area agreement, a part of that was a lowering of a rental charge. So the rental charge helps with the capital costs. And when Dunbarton and New Boston were both trying to renegotiate, they successfully lowered that rental charge from 2.5 to 2%. So Goffstown, I would say it was probably about a $50,000 to $60,000 annual decrease that New Boston had to pay. That 2.5% was now reinstated, and New Boston agreed to that. So again, that helps with some of our capital expenditures. And then there were some very slight language changes with respect to transitioning. This year with COVID, with the last couple of years with COVID, we would typically have step-up days for our New Boston students, but we couldn't do that. So now we have an alternative means of having kids transition from New Boston Central School, to Mountain View Middle School. And then as I mentioned before, joint resources. We have some folks who, on our data management side, our student data management, where we have employees in Goffstown who help in New Boston, and we typically bill New Boston. Randy, I think, was here earlier. He's our facilities director, and occasionally we provide custodial assistance or maintenance assistance to them, and then we charge New Boston a rate for that. And then lastly, documentation and reports. The school district has to provide New Boston with any and all documents that are readily available that help in pretty much justifying what Goffstown does, or in terms of its educational outcomes, as well as student discipline, kids who might be at risk, etc. So historically the SAU has provided that, but this just codified it. And then this one is probably the most important one to Goffstown. So when Dunbarton left the area agreement, let's say, was it 10 years ago, Brian, or close to that, there was a little bit of a loophole in the state statute. And there was a dispute as to whether or not Dunbarton still owed that rental charge to Goffstown, because there was an outstanding bond at Goffstown High School. Well, that dispute went all the way to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, and Goffstown lost. I believe it was, what, is it 3-2, or what's the, right? They lost on a 3-2 vote, which meant that Dunbarton did not have to continue paying on that bond obligation, even though many, including myself, I wasn't on the board at the time, who thought that they would continue to owe that obligation. So what Goffstown did this time around is that if New Boston were to leave the area agreement, if there were any existing bonds or financial instruments with respect to any additions or renovations, New Boston would continue to pay those on a proportional basis for the lifetime of that financial instrument or bond. So that was a very, very big thing for the Goffstown School Board, and one I'm, as your business administrator, was very relieved to see. Similar to all of our other budget documents, if you want to review the area agreement, I will be doing bedtime tomorrow night. No, I'm only kidding. I will be able, it's on the website for one, and you can always give me a call and I can share that with you, but it's on the website and it's about 20 some odd pages. Most of it is technical, which is, like I said, 6 pages dedicated just to calculate the tuition alone. And again, feel free to email me or call me if you have any questions on the area. And that's all I have, Mr. Moderator. I'm going to be up there again.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Yes. Come forward to the microphone, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Liz Dolan from 356 Worthley Hill Road in Goffstown. I don't see, I know it's complicated, but I'm curious if they pay the same amount that we do. We have a number that we're paying, what, $13,000 something to educate a child on average a year. How much do they pay? They must want to know at their town meeting what they pay.
Thank you.
That's a good question, Liz. So, it's part of that tuition calculation. So roughly, it's about $14,500 for Mountain View Middle School, and it's well over $16,000 now for the high school. And it fluctuates because it's all dependent upon the number of students at both Goffstown, for Goffstown students, as well as New Boston students. But generally speaking, it's higher than what Goffstown pays. All right, and part of the reason is because they pay the rental fee, which Goffstown residents don't pay. Hopefully that answers your question. I will say that New Boston Central School has a lower per pupil cost, a little bit less than our elementary school cost, but by and large, I think we had mentioned it in our previous slides, both Mountain View and the high school are within, I think they're in the bottom in terms of the lowest cost per pupil in the state, so that also helps New Boston because even though they're paying a rental on top of that, it's still very competitively priced for them.
Are there any other questions concerning the renewal of the area agreement and Article 4? You, of course, may, as Scott invited, contact him for further information later. Is that fair? Yeah. Okay, so since it's a fairly technical document. Seeing no questions, I will close the discussion of Article 4. Okay, motions are made to restrict reconsideration. Is there a second? Heather? All motions are made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. We will now move on to Article 5. This is the Facilities Capital Reserve Fund deposit to see if the Goffstown School District will raise and appropriate $200,000 for depositing into the existing Facilities Capital Reserve Fund to come from the unassigned fund balance. I'll let Scott describe what a capital reserve fund is, why we're doing it, and the amount.
So Article 5 is your deposit into your capital reserve fund, and this the school board recommended 8.1 and the budget committee recommended 9.3, and it's a $200,000 deposit. So this fund was set up about 4 years ago, and it is for existing capital assets. We cannot use it for any type of expansion in any of our schools. And for those of you who might not know, the town has a long history of having what's called a Capital Improvements Plan, CIP. They meet during the summer, and these are members of the school district as well as all of the other departments. And what they do is they articulate what their capital needs are over the next 6-year period, and it's a tremendous planning tool. Some people do believe that it's a budgetary tool. In some cases it is, but it's really more of a planning tool, and the CIP process seeks to try to smooth out the capital needs of both the town and the school, so it's looked at holistically from a group of individuals. Right now, we have easily over $6 million of projects in the school's capital improvements matrix. And the one thing for me as your business administrator that's incredibly profound in terms of having this is that it's a funding source for any type of potential grants or other types of incentives. And one example I wanted to give to you is that last year there was an incredible incentive by Eversource for energy efficiency by putting LED lights. So these are new lights in this gym as well as at Maple Avenue, Bartlett, and at the high school. And ironically, I think it was maybe, that incentive came out 4 weeks after, I think it was Principal McBride took me aside and said the lights are really bad at the high school. The referees were complaining. But so anyway, we got over $75,000 of lighting for, I think it was a little over $16,000 of actual cost, and we used the Capital Reserve Fund as that match to do that. So it's it's a really great tool. Right now our balance is a little over $250,000, and some of the projects that we've done over the last couple of years, we've replaced, there were brick stairs, now they're more of a granite type slab at the back of Goffstown High School. I mentioned that lighting retrofit project. Here at Mountain View Middle School, which is, Ellen, was it 30 years old we're at now, right? Yeah, 30? 30. So we have a cistern tank that was leaking, and we had to do a massive clean out of that and repair of that. That was over $155,000, and we used our the CRF for that purpose. We also have a failing scoreboard at Goffstown High School that is on order, so hopefully that will come in for the spring. And here are some of the things that we're looking at into the future. Both Bartlett and Maple Avenue bathrooms are historic, to say the least. Those need to be renovated. We also are looking at replacement playground equipment, as well as a project that we're getting a group together. Our Goffstown High School Theater, the seats are well over 30 years old. We can't get certain parts, and I think we have about 12 seats that are now out of commission. So we are looking at that project as well. So essentially, what this warrant article does is it asks voters to approve a $200,000 deposit, which would come from the unassigned fund balance. That's that number that I mentioned to you before, that is comprised of an underspend of the budget and any unanticipated revenues. So in this particular case, the taxes have already been raised on that amount. You're not raising any new taxes. And with that, there is a financial consequence of about 11 cents. So if voters support using the depositing $200,000 into the Capital Reserve Fund, no new taxes are raised. However, if voters were to vote it down, it would be about an 11-cent decrease in the tax rate. So there is a tax rate implication. And that's all I have for the Capital Reserve Fund.
Thank you, Scott. Scott mentioned the CIP committee, the Capital Improvements Committee. There are several people here who are on that committee, including Jim Craig from the Board of Selectmen, or Select Board over there, Richard Manzo from the Budget Committee, Ellen Vermarkowitz from the School Board, and Kimberly Pease and Brad Parkhurst were members at large, and they spent many delightful summer evenings going over the CIP plan, which included this type of planning for capital reserve funds. So, thank you. Does anybody have any questions on Article 5? Might as well. Same drill, you still have to introduce yourself even though you just spoke.
I apologize to be a pest, but I try to understand how the taxes work. And sometimes it'll say something doesn't cost anything because it's coming from money we already raised. And now when you told me that the tax rate would go down if we didn't keep that money, is that because then once you take it and spend it for something, it's automatically reassessed?
No, I guess the best way is the school board and myself, I always want to be transparent with you, you know? So like, yes, you're not raising new taxes, but if the voters were not to approve this, about 11 cents would drop into that fund balance. So you wouldn't be taking it out, you wouldn't be using it.
Oh,
it would just be more money that would be fund balance to reduce taxes.
Okay, I get it.
Okay.
I support it. I just want to understand.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Any other questions? Yes. Oh, she reminded me, the speaker, you have a voter's card. Don't lose these. If we have to have either a standing vote or a ballot vote, this is your admission ticket. People tend to lose them, put them under their chairs. So thank you.
Thank you. I actually had the same question. So I just wanted to clarify. If we vote this down, it would decrease the tax rate by 11 cents?
Approximately.
On the dollar? And is the floor allowed to make a motion?
I'm sorry?
Can the floor make a motion to change that amount to 0?
That's a moderator question?
Okay. I direct that to the moderator.
It's 11 cents per thousand.
Okay.
So you'd like to make a motion?
To change the amount to 0
Okay.
for Article 5.
And is there a second? Is there a second? Yes, sir. What's your name? We need your name, sir.
Brian Mazer.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to come and fill out this and put both names on it. And if you'd like to come up and do that right now.
Sure. We can do it. Come on. I brought my
Okay. Okay, Article 5. Now fill in his name. And do you know the
Yes,
second?
Brian
Okay.
Mazer. Yep.
And all you have to do is put in the dollar amount there.
Change it.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
She can fill it in for you if she knows your name.
Perfect. You know how to spell my name, right?
Hopefully you can read my writing. This line?
Okay, this is your go. Okay.
We good?
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we jumped ahead. I'm sorry. Did we move? They reminded me, we didn't make the motion to bring it forward. Ellen reminded me. So we're going to do that retroactively. We're going to fall through a hole in the space-time continuum. Ellen, we're going to retroactively make a motion to bring it forward. Retta, you're going to second that? Okay. We're treating that as brought forward. Thank you. There's been a motion made to amend Article 5 to make the dollar amount 0. Is there any questions on this article? If the amendment passes and there's no further amendment, the article will be amended to appear as 0 amount dollars on the warrant. Okay? So if you vote in favor of the amendment, it has the effect of reducing the capital reserve amount to 0. Is there any discussion on the amendment or the proposed amendment? Scott.
On behalf of the Goffstown School Board, I would state that the board would oppose this amendment. As was stated, there is well over $6 million of capital improvement projects that the district has, which is very well documented in terms of its participation in the CIP type process. You'll note that it ranges from things like bathroom renovations to a boiler, if you had to replace a boiler. One of the things that perhaps wasn't in the presentation that should have been was that if you did have a type of failure of a mechanical system, because it's an existing capital asset, so if an air conditioning unit went at Goffstown High School or a boiler went at Bartlett, we could replace that immediately because we would have those funds. So again, with over $6 million of needs, long-term needs, a $200,000 deposit is a very, very minimal ask to keep monies aside for these types of contingencies, and also to try to balance out the tax rate. So when you do have a capital improvements plan, like the town does, school does as well, you're able to purchase things in a staggered fashion so you don't have to hit the voters up and have a big bump at one particular time. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. Same deal, you have to tell us again who you are.
Liz Dolan from Worthley Hill Road in Goffstown. I brought that up, so I want to speak to it. I do support putting that money aside. Let's all remember that condo that fell apart in Florida with people in it. It happened because they had low fees. You have to pay as you go. You have to be prepared, so 11 cents isn't that much.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment, the proposed amendment to amend Article 5? Jared?
Jared Talbot, 17 Pinecrest Drive. Though I respect Resident Scott Gross for what was stated, I would say that we have a contingency fund of 2.5% that is usually funded by the school board. So if there is ever a capital or a catastrophe event that occurs within the school system, that would be covered by the 2.5% we do have funded within the school. So I just want to make sure that that is also noted in the record.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll bring it to a vote. If you vote yes, you are voting to amend the article to reduce the dollar amount to zero. If you vote no, you're voting not to amend. This is a yes, we have no bananas vote. You vote no, you're not amending the article, and unless there's some further amendment, it will appear as written on the warrant. Okay. All those in favor of the article, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those against, please signify by saying nay. Nay. Okay, I'm calling it a vote in the negative. The amendment does not pass. Are there any further amendments to be brought forward on Article 5? Seeing, yes, sir.
Fred Plett from 29 My Way in Goffstown. I just moved to restrict reconsideration.
I didn't hear what he said. Oh, okay, thank you. So that microphone is very, very muffled. So you moved to
It's me that's muffled. Who's muffled? Fred Plett from 29 My Way in Goffstown. I just moved to restrict reconsideration.
Thank you. Is there a second? Okay, seconded by, we'll have to give Alan credit. All those in favor of restricting reconsideration of Article 5 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, Article 6, the 5% contingency fund per RSA 198 4B, Roman numeral 2. Shall the Goffstown School District adopt the provisions of that statute enacted in 2020 and authorize indefinitely until specific rescission the district to retain year-end unassigned general funds in amount not to exceed 5% of the district's current fiscal year net assessment. Okay, I think you can read the rest of it, because if I try, I'll mess it up. Does anybody want me to read the whole thing? Scott, are you going to, oh, somebody, we're learning from, yeah, thank you. Shane, move to bring it forward. Terry, second. Okay, it's brought forward for discussion. Recognize Scott Gross.
Thank you. You'll see that before you is a warrant article number 6, which is a 5% contingency fund, and the school board voted 9-0 to recommend. I should have mentioned on a couple of the other warrant articles, the budget committee does not vote to recommend or not recommend on non-appropriation type articles, and this is one of them. So just to give you, before I even get started, Jared made an excellent point. The contingency fund is available for those types of things that I mentioned before, like if a boiler were to go, your septic system, unforeseen types of things. So you have your CRF, your capital reserve fund could be a source, and this is another very, very important source. So thank you, Jared. So in 2013, Goffstown voters adopted New Hampshire RSA 198:4B Roman numeral 2. It's called the 2.5% contingency fund. And what it does is it allows the school district to set aside monies from their unassigned fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. And when we adopted it, the statute was specific. You could use it for emergency purposes and to reduce the tax rate. That was clearly in the statute. So Goffstown did use the contingency fund twice. I believe one was for a drainage project at the high school. And then about a couple of years ago, all of a sudden we started seeing our VCT, our vinyl composition tiles at the high school were starting to pop everywhere, unbeknownst. We weren't sure why. And below that was asbestos. So the tiles that it was adhered to were asbestos. So we had to do, over the summer, an emergency job. And we got approval from the budget committee and then the commissioner of education, and we used that particular fund, so it came in handy. In 2020, the New Hampshire legislature changed this RSA to allow for up to 5% in a contingency fund. So for some of you who may or may not know, the select board has what's called a fund balance, and they retain typically anywhere from 5 to upwards of 17%. And theirs is mission critical because they collect all the taxes in Goffstown, and then on demand, when I ask them for monies to pay the school's bills, they have to give it to me. So it's very, very important that they have a fund balance to not only for cash flow purposes for the town's use, but also for the school's use. And also they have to deal with folks who might not pay their taxes on time. So they have to deal with that. They have to have money, almost like a buffer there. They also have to have a buffer for any type of emergencies if a bridge goes out. So there's a very, very important reason why the town has a fund balance. What this contingency fund does, it's very similar to that, where it allows the school district to retain, in this case, up to 5%. And I'm going to cover with you a little bit later how much money that is for unforeseen type expenses that pop up, or to reduce the tax rate. I'm going to explain that in a second. So the New Hampshire school attorneys highly recommended that even though the statute changed, that school districts should readopt this particular statute if you wanted the 5%. So there are some attorneys who believe that the statute is, that because the legislature changed it, that you automatically have the 5%, but we're taking a more conservative approach and bringing that forward to the voters for their approval. So what are some of the differences? So right now, we have the 2%, and it's going to go to 5%. Well, again, the key word is that you can't exceed 2.5%, or you cannot exceed 5% of the net assessment. So the school district, as you can see here, right now can retain up to $665,000 in that fund. If this were to pass and it goes to 5%, it'd be a little over $1.3 million. It doesn't mean that the school district has to put aside $1.3 million, but they have the ability to put up to that amount of money. Are they cumulative? The funds are not cumulative, so they expire on June 30th at the end of our fiscal year each and every year. They do not accumulate, and the school board, who is charged with this, they have to take a vote every June in terms of how much money do they want to set aside in this particular fund. So every June, it's for the last 3 years or so or more, they've had to decide how much they want to put in there. So the uses. So the statute under what we currently have is emergency expenses and tax rate reduction. And the new statute is unanticipated expenses and tax rate reduction. I believe there is a bill out there right now that is changing it to emergency expenditures as well. But I can share, as the school board has mentioned, this is not a fund that they use willy-nilly. It's something that would be of urgent type nature that was totally unplanned for, that needs to happen ASAP, not something that they would just use because they needed something. In terms of use of the contingency fund, before you had to hold a public hearing, you had to get DOE commissioner approval, and if you had a budget committee, they had to approve it. Now what it states is that the school board has to hold a public hearing to get public comment, and then after which they can take action. And then in terms of the after you use the funds, you had to publish it in your annual report, and now basically it's the same thing. You have to say you spent X amount of money, and the voters have to know what you spent it on. So one of the reasons why, as your business administrator, I feel pretty strongly about this is the second one, tax rate reduction. So I mentioned to you before, remember I said I'm holding up this salmon piece of paper, and it's the one that I get really nervous about because it's all about the revenues, and are the revenues hitting targets. With this particular fund, if I put in my estimate that I think we're going to be able to use $2.5 million of unassigned fund balance to reduce the tax rate, and I'm only coming in at $2.1 million, I'm going to be going to the school board and saying, I need to use $400,000 to hit the target that we told the voters we would hit. So what that means is that this tool prevents wild fluctuations in your tax rate. And it allows the school district and me as your business administrator to try to stabilize things a lot better. Because I think the worst thing is for people's taxes to go way high, then way low. An EKG is not necessarily a good, trend line for your taxes for people who have mortgages with escrow accounts. So it allows us to try to keep it as stable as possible, and it's a phenomenal tool for that purpose. The select board does pretty much the same thing. They're able to use fund balance to try to keep the tax rate as stable as possible to prevent those wild fluctuations. So this would do the same thing. I do not anticipate that the school board, if it were to be approved, would deposit the whole thing. But if it did, and then we saw less revenues, then I would be able to go to them in September or October, right before they set the tax rate, to say, hey, we need to spend monies from that contingency fund to reduce the tax rate. So it's a really, really good tool that the town has and the school district hopefully will have. And that's about it for this one.
Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Barbara.
Good evening, Barbara Griffin, Merrill Road. Before I ask my question, I want to thank the school board and the administration again for the presentation tonight. It is of the usual caliber we have come to know from the Goffstown School Board, and I want to thank you for it because I am aware that there are meetings going on across the state, and many, many school boards do not give the information that you give at your meeting, so I want to thank you for that. And I have some question about the role modeling, but I'll ask you offline, because that looked like a really big number of students, and they can't possibly all be coming from Goffstown. But in regards to this warrant article, why was there a decision made to go from 2.5% to 5%? You didn't have to change the percentage amount. The statute authorizes you to go to that amount. Additionally, I would point out that I don't think there really was any difference between what you can use it for. Emergency expenses would certainly be included on unanticipated expenses, and I think you're sort of parsing words here, I appreciate that the attorneys all told you to put it back on the warrant article, so you complied with it, and you don't want to have to go to DOE if you don't have to, if you want to use it. So I get that, but I don't understand why you're asking to increase this. And if you have seen me at meetings, you know I have a beef with the town in regards to the use of fund balances to balance things. And so I understand we have the fund, but I haven't heard anything in regards to why we need to increase it. I would also point out that the vinyl tile at the high school has been a known issue for many, many years, and I'm not saying it wasn't used appropriately to deal with it, but we've known as a district that that issue has existed, and there have been decisions made that it was safer and cheaper to keep things in place, and it was safe, there was no question about it, and you appropriately dealt with it when it came up, but why the 5%?
So, Barbara, if you could stay there for a quick second, could you hold on one second? I just want to make sure that I'm answering your question properly. With respect to, even though the statute changed, the reason why we're putting it on the ballot, the board is because school attorneys throughout the state, not a majority, a majority of them, I should say, recommend that even though the statute changed, you should get reaffirmation from your voters. Why we're going to the higher amount? Is that really more your question?
That's really more my question.
So the higher amount is a means in which it has more tax rate implications, more of a tool for your tax rate than anything else. So let me give you a good example. I showed you how I guess I overestimated the tax rate, and we had more revenues coming in or less of an expenditure of our budget. Now, had I had this tool, I would have recommended that the school board retain $1.2, $1.3 million. When we go through a bad year and we need that money, then I would go to the school board and say, let's use $500,000 from the contingency fund to lower the tax rate. So trying to keep it more stable. And so last year was a great example where we had like over $3.5 million of unassigned fund balance. I probably would have kept another $500,000 for future years tax rate reduction, not necessarily for emergency type expenditures, but it is a very similar to what the select board do in terms of that.
Does anybody else want to speak?
Follow up. Oh,
anybody
sorry.
else want to speak before Barbara? Allow Barbara to speak again. Seeing none, go ahead, Barbara.
Sorry about that. In follow-up to what you said, I understand the methodology and what you're talking about, but what is the amount of money to be raised from taxes in general, raised by local? I went to grab the sheet and I didn't grab the right one. How much a year in the budget are we raising for the school budget from taxes?
About 25 million.
Okay, so we're raising it by 600,000. Right, we're doubling the amount, arguably, which has a negligible effect on the tax rate. And so I need to say I am not in favor of this because of the way you are allowed to expend the funds. You will now be allowed to expend the funds by simply having a public hearing, which is a notice that you're going to have a hearing during one of your regular school board meetings, and this is obviously not personal, it's just how things happen. And so the process that the current statute requires you to go through with the outside authorization isn't there. And for the town, when they go to use their fund balance, my recollection is, and things may have changed, they do it through their warrant article process every year and get approval of the voters that way. So what this statute change does is really two things. It increases the percentage amount, which I would argue has a negligible effect on the tax rate, and I don't agree with anyways, because I think the taxes should be paid or refunded to the people who are paying them, not held for years. People need to understand how much they're spending at the time they're spending it. And you can spend it now with only a public hearing instead of a discussion at a meeting like this, either at a school, at your annual meeting, or on the town side. So I'm just stating my position. I'm not making any motion. I think I understand what it's doing and why you've elected to take the 5%. So thank you.
Scott has a response, but I'm going to let this gentleman go as well. Please identify yourself.
Joseph Cameron from 31 Merrill Road. So I thought I understood you to say that it's not carried over from year to year, but then you just said that it was.
That it is. It has to be voted on every year. So, like right now, there's $665,000 that is set aside.
Okay. And if you don't use that,
if if the board takes no action in, say, June of this year, that $665,000 automatically liquidates and goes towards tax relief.
So it goes back to the taxpayers?
Correct.
Okay. It doesn't get carried over.
It does not carry over unless the board votes to do it, and they typically have.
So if it gets carried over, do you then collect additional funds?
No, because those monies were already raised. They're already set aside. And I will say in response to Representative Griffin, we were dealt these cards. So the legislature approved this statute. The statute does say that, again, my job is to be as transparent as possible and to let you know as to what the uses are. I should also let you know that when I talked to the school board about this, I highly recommended that they consult with, although they don't need to, that they consult with the budget committee and that they make it as transparent as a process as possible. That said, I am aware of an amendment that is I think it's in the Senate right now, that changes the language back to emergency. Unless that died over the last 3 to 4 weeks, I don't know. But over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I checked and there was an amendment. But again, we're just kind of dealt those the cards that we have, and we can't change the statute. Only the legislature can do that. But what the board can do is the board can hold themselves to a higher standard. Higher than what the statute is, and that would be having the budget committee review it or any other type of political body.
Hi, I'm Joe Alexander, Oakwood Lane. So two things. The legislature passed that bill, and it's an enabling bill. So in no shorter terms, you don't have to go to the 5%, but you're allowed to go there. I'm personally opposed to this, and I'll be voting no on the ballot. But my ask is, I have to speak to you, but my ask is to the school board that as chair of budget committee, we've had a great relationship working with each other, and my ask is that whenever you try to use these funds, you come to the budget committee and at least let us know and solicit our advice on that stuff. So thank you.
Okay, anything further on Article 6? Thank you. That was a good discussion. Seeing nothing, I am going to close the discussion on Article 6. Okay. Jared's made a motion to restrict reconsideration. Is there a second? Second's been made. Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, motion carries. That brings us to the end of the warrant. Under state law, nothing more can be brought forward for action that's not warned to you by being placed on the warrant, so we cannot do any further business tonight, so I'm going to hopefully close this. Hold on, Brad. He gets eager. At my lunchtime YMCA trip today, I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a retired lawyer who happens to be a former lawyer for the school district. When I told him he knows I'm the moderator, I was coming tonight to the school meeting, his comment was, "Your town is easy." And I took that, as has been said earlier, as a compliment to the school board and the budget committee on their preparation, and a compliment to you as the voters who participate in a responsible way. My firm represents about 35 towns. I go to a lot of town meetings. We don't see this in some towns, maybe even most towns. So it's a compliment to Goffstown, and I thank both the school board, the budget committee, the staff, and Denise for helping me get ready, and you for helping with this meeting. I want to remind you that the town deliberative session is tomorrow. Please come. Mark and Jim will be there. You can talk to them. And voting day on March 8th, I believe, second Tuesday in March. As Scott pointed out, I forgot to give the annual plug for the high school musical, SpongeBob the Musical, on the next 2 weekends. Please go, it's a treat. With that, I will entertain from Brad a motion. Motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Okay. Second by Mark. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.